The royal guard heard Kate's name on the radio, and moved before approval, was given Best Royal Story. Thick stone walls blocked the outside world, and inside, everything followed a routine that had been practiced thousands of times. Screens glowed softly, radios whispered low voices, and guards stood at their posts with calm focus. Nothing suggested that this day would be different. The guards on duty were experienced men and women. They were trained to notice small details, to stay calm under pressure, and to follow rules without question. For them, discipline was not just a job requirement, it was a way of life. Every movement, every word, every decision was shaped by years of training. Among them was a senior officer who had served for more than 2 decades. He was not loud or dramatic. His strength came from silence and awareness. He had seen many situations where seconds mattered. He had learned that danger often arrived quietly, without warning. That experience stayed with him always. The radio system played softly in the background, carrying routine updates from different units. Most messages were short and unimportant. Traffic updates, schedule confirmations, security checks. The guards listened, but nothing demanded action. Then a voice on the radio changed the air in the room. It was not loud, it was not rushed, but it spoke a name. Kate. The senior officer froze for half a second. His eyes lifted from the screen in front of him. Around the room, a few other guards also paused. It was subtle but noticeable. That name was not common in their work. When it appeared on a secure channel, it meant something serious. The radio message continued, but the signal was weak. Words came through broken and unclear. There was mention of movement, confusion, and concern. No full explanation, no clear order, just enough to raise alarm. The senior officer felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had heard that name before in moments that later became critical. Kate was connected to sensitive royal matters. Her safety was not a small issue. Any mention of her required attention, even if details were missing. Protocol said to wait. Protocol always said to wait. The officer glanced at the clock. Time moved forward without care. If the situation was real, every minute mattered. If it was nothing, then waiting would change nothing. But if it was something serious, delay could make the difference. He looked around the room. Other guards were pretending to focus on their screens, but he knew they were listening. They were thinking the same thing. Years of training had taught them to read moments like this. The silence felt heavy. The radio crackled again, still unclear, still incomplete. No direct command followed. The officer leaned slightly closer to the radio. His face remained calm, but his mind moved fast. He replayed past incidents in his memory. Times when early action saved lives. Times when hesitation caused regret. He remembered one situation years ago. Approval had taken too long. By the time permission came, the moment had passed. The outcome had not been good. That memory had never left him. Rules existed for a reason, he knew that. But rules also depended on judgment, and judgment depended on experience. He quietly stood up from his chair. The movement caught attention immediately. A junior guard looked up, surprised. Another shifted in his seat. No one spoke. The officer walked to the central console. His steps were steady. He did not rush. Panic had no place here. "Confirm the source of that transmission," he said calmly. The technician nodded and began working faster. Fingers moved across keys. Screens refreshed. The signal was traced, but information remained incomplete. "We don't have full clearance yet," the technician said carefully. The officer nodded. He already knew that. He looked at the wall display showing live locations of nearby units. Everything appeared normal, too normal. Sometimes danger hid behind normality. The radio spoke again. This time the voice sounded tense. Still no clear explanation. "Just urgency." The officer took a slow breath. His decision formed quietly without drama. He turned to a small group of guards nearby. These were people he trusted deeply. They had served with him for years. They did not ask questions lightly. "Get ready," he said softly. That was all. No alarms were sounded, no announcements made. This was not a full deployment, not yet. It was preparation. Silent, careful preparation. The guards moved instantly. Chairs slid back. Equipment was checked. Jackets were adjusted. Their faces showed focus, not fear. One guard hesitated. "Sir, approval hasn't come through." The officer met his eyes. There was no anger there, only certainty. "I know," he replied. "We are preparing, nothing more." That answer was enough. Preparation was allowed. Readiness was never against the rules. The room remained quiet, but the energy had changed. The air felt sharper. Everyone was alert now. Outside the command center, vehicles stood waiting as they always did. Engines were off. Drivers nearby sensed movement inside and stepped closer, ready. Inside, the officer watched the radio closely. His hand rested near the communication panel. He was listening not just to words, but to tone, to pauses, to what was not being said. Another memory surfaced in his mind. A mentor once told him, "When something feels wrong, it usually is. Trust that feeling, but act with care." That advice had guided him many times. Minutes passed, still no official approval, still no clear explanation. The officer knew that higher command was likely discussing the situation, evaluating risks, reviewing rules. That process took time they might not have. He thought about Kate, not personally but professionally, her importance, her vulnerability, the responsibility attached to her safety. If nothing was wrong, preparing would change nothing. If something was wrong, preparing could change everything. He looked again at the guards around him. They were ready. They trusted him. That trust carried weight. He spoke again, just loud enough to be heard by those closest. "Stay alert. No movement until I say so." They nodded. The radio suddenly went silent. That silence was worse than noise. The officer felt it deep in his gut. Silence often meant confusion or loss of contact. Neither was good. He straightened his shoulders. His face remained calm, but his mind was made up. Waiting any longer would be irresponsible. He pressed the communication button. "Unit leaders," he said evenly, "stand by." That message alone broke protocol slightly. It signaled readiness beyond routine. It would be noticed, but he accepted that. Around him, screens continued to glow. The world outside moved on unaware. Inside the command center, a line had been crossed, not into action yet, but into decision. The officer removed his headset slowly and placed it on the desk. He looked at the exit door. He knew that once they moved, questions would follow. Explanations would be demanded. Careers could be affected. But he also knew this. Regret was heavier than consequences. He took one more breath and waited, not passively, but prepared. Whatever came next, they would not be late. And all of it had begun with a single name on the radio. The command center remained tense after the radio went silent. No one spoke, but everyone was listening in their own way. The senior officer stood still near the console, his eyes fixed on the screens, his ears tuned for the smallest sound. Silence inside a place built for communication felt unnatural, like the calm before something important. A technician tried to reconnect the signal. Lines were checked again and again. Channels were scanned carefully. The radio gave only faint static. No clear voice returned. The officer did not raise his voice or show frustration. He had learned long ago that calm leadership mattered most when uncertainty ruled. Still, inside his mind, thoughts moved fast. Silence could mean many things. It could mean the issue was resolved. Or it could mean something had gone wrong. He turned to the deputy officer standing nearby. The deputy was younger but highly capable, with sharp instincts and respect for experience. "Any updates from external units?" the officer asked quietly. "Nothing confirmed," the deputy replied. "Higher command is reviewing the transmission. They haven't issued instructions yet." The officer nodded. That was expected. Reviews took time. Discussions moved slowly through layers of authority. Everyone wanted to be sure before acting. But the officer also knew that uncertainty did not pause reality. Whatever was happening outside continued, whether permission came or not. He walked slowly across the room, stopping near a large screen that displayed live security zones. Everything looked normal, too normal. Experience told him that serious problems rarely announced themselves clearly. Another guard approached him carefully. "Sir, should we stand down until approval comes?" The officer looked at him thoughtfully. The question was fair. The rules were clear. Acting without permission carried risk. "We will not stand down," the officer said calmly. "We stay ready." That answer held the balance between caution and responsibility. Readiness did not break rules, but it respected the seriousness of the situation. The officer returned to the radio and adjusted the settings himself. He listened closely, hoping for any sound, any hint of information. A faint signal suddenly returned. A voice, weak and unclear, spoke briefly before cutting out again. Only a few words were understandable. The name Kate was heard again, followed by a mention of a location and concern. That was enough. The officer felt the weight of the moment settle fully on his shoulders. Hearing the name again confirmed that the earlier transmission was not a mistake. Something was happening, and it involved someone important. He closed his eyes for a brief second, not in fear but in focus. Then he opened them and made a decision. He stepped toward the center of the room and spoke clearly, though still controlled. "Confirm the location mentioned in the transmission," he said. "Cross-check with current security assignments." The team moved quickly. Screens changed. Data appeared. The location was not marked as high risk, but it was sensitive. It was a place where security depended heavily on timing and coordination. The deputy officer leaned closer. "Sir, if this involves her, shouldn't we wait for direct orders?" The officer met his gaze. "If this involves her," he said evenly, "then we should already be moving." The deputy did not argue. He understood the meaning behind the words. Waiting could be safe for careers, but not always for people. The officer thought back to earlier years, when he had followed rules perfectly and still watched situations fall apart. He remembered standing afterward, wishing he had trusted his judgment sooner. He would not repeat that mistake. He walked to a side panel and activated a limited alert. It was not a full deployment signal. It did not notify everyone. It quietly informed a small group of trusted unit leaders to prepare for possible movement. This action stayed just within the boundaries of authority. It did not break protocol outright, but it pushed close to the edge. The response was immediate. Small confirmation lights appeared on the panel. The message had been received. The officer felt a slight easing in his chest. They were not alone now. Readiness was spreading quietly. Around the room, guards adjusted their posture. Their attention sharpened. They knew something serious was unfolding, even if details were still missing. One guard checked equipment again. Another reviewed access routes on a tablet. Movements were smooth and professional. No one panicked. Panic was not allowed here. The radio suddenly crackled louder. This time the voice stayed on longer. "There's uncertainty, movement near the location, unable to confirm safety at this time." The message ended abruptly. The officer clenched his jaw slightly. That message removed doubt. Safety was not confirmed. That alone justified action. He stepped toward the exit door, then stopped. He knew once he crossed that door, preparation would turn into motion. There would be no easy return. He looked back at the room one last time. These people trusted him. They would follow his lead not because of rank alone, but because of shared experience. He spoke clearly. "We proceed to stage 1 readiness. Vehicles prepared, teams assigned. No sirens, no signals." The deputy repeated the order calmly. Guards acknowledged with brief nods and quiet responses. Outside, engines started softly. Doors opened and closed. Equipment was secured. Everything happened without drawing attention. Inside the command center, communication lines remained open. Higher command still had not given approval, but they were aware that something was happening. Questions would come soon. The officer accepted that. As he walked toward the exit, his mind remained focused on the reason for all of this. Kate, a name that carried responsibility. A name that demanded protection, not hesitation. He did not know exactly what they would find. He did not know how serious the situation truly was. But he knew one thing clearly. If they arrived too late, no explanation would ever feel enough. He stepped outside into the cool air. The vehicles were ready. Guards stood by, alert and composed. The officer paused briefly, listening to the radio one more time. Static. Then silence. He gave a single nod. They were moving forward, not because permission had been given, but because duty required it. And somewhere beyond the walls of the command center, time continued to move, unaware that a quiet decision had just changed the course of what would happen next. The vehicles moved quietly through the city streets, keeping a steady speed and careful distance from one another. There were no flashing lights, no loud signals, nothing that would draw attention. To anyone watching, it would look like an ordinary movement of official cars. Inside, however, every guard was fully alert. The senior officer sat in the lead vehicle, eyes forward, radio resting in his hand. His face remained calm, but his mind stayed sharp. He listened to every sound, every pause on the radio. Silence still filled the channels, and that silence made the weight of responsibility heavier. Each guard knew their role. They had trained for moments like this, moments where information was incomplete and decisions had to be made carefully. No one spoke unless necessary. The focus was complete. As the convoy moved closer to the location mentioned on the radio, the officer reviewed the area in his mind. He knew the streets, the access points, the buildings nearby. It was a place that looked peaceful on the surface. That made it more dangerous. Calm places often hid problems until it was too late. The deputy officer's voice came through the radio. All units in position. No unusual activity spotted so far. The senior officer acknowledged with a brief response. He did not relax. Experience had taught him that the absence of visible trouble did not mean safety. They slowed as they entered the outer zone. The vehicles separated slightly, each taking a planned route. This was not a rush. It was a controlled approach designed to observe without being noticed. The officer glanced at the rear-view mirror. The guards behind him looked steady and focused. No one showed fear. They trusted the process and they trusted his judgment. The radio crackled again. This time a different voice spoke. It was faint but clearer than before. Still no confirmation, visual contact unclear, staying alert, the message ended. The officer felt his grip tighten slightly on the radio. The words confirmed what he already suspected. Something was unresolved. Something was still unfolding. He gave a quiet instruction. Maintain distance. Observe before engaging. The vehicles slowed further. They reached a point where they could stop without blocking traffic or drawing attention. Guards stepped out calmly, blending into the surroundings as much as possible. Their movements were casual, but their awareness was sharp. The officer stepped out last. He scanned the area slowly, taking in details. People moved about their day unaware. Cars passed. Nothing looked wrong. That made him uneasy. He walked a few steps forward, listening closely. His radio remained silent. He could feel time pressing, but he refused to rush blindly. One guard approached him quietly. "Sir, should we move closer?" The officer considered for a moment. "Not yet," he said. "We watch." They waited. Minutes passed. Each second felt longer than the last. The officer's thoughts returned again and again to the reason they were here. Kate, her safety, the reason they had moved without approval. He reminded himself that acting early did not mean acting carelessly. They needed clarity. Suddenly, one of the guards signaled from across the street. It was subtle but clear. He had noticed something. The officer walked over calmly. "What do you see?" "Unusual movement near the entrance," the guard said quietly. "Someone watching the area closely. Doesn't look normal." The officer followed the guard's gaze. There was a person standing near a corner pretending to be on a phone. The posture was wrong, too still, too focused. The officer did not jump to conclusions, but his instincts sharpened. He spoke softly into the radio. "All units, stay alert. We may have interest." The message was short and controlled. No panic. The officer moved a little closer, careful not to draw attention. He observed the person again. The individual shifted slightly, eyes scanning the area. This was enough to confirm that the situation required presence. The officer signaled discreetly. Two guards moved into positions that gave them a better view. Others adjusted their stance, ready but relaxed. At that moment, another radio message came through, clearer than before. "Situation unstable. Concern remains. No official clearance yet." The officer exhaled slowly. He had already crossed the point of waiting. Now the priority was control. He made a quiet decision. Proceed to visible presence, slow and calm. The guards followed instantly. They did not rush. They simply became noticeable. Their posture changed slightly. Their presence was clear without being aggressive. The person near the corner noticed. He shifted again, then stepped back, blending into the crowd and disappearing down a side street. The officer watched until the figure was gone. He did not chase. The goal was not confrontation. It was prevention. A few moments later, another guard approached. "Sir, we've made contact with local security. They were unaware of any issue involving her." The officer nodded. That explained the confusion. Information had not traveled properly. Gaps like this created danger. He stepped aside and contacted higher command directly. He spoke calmly, reporting facts only. The unclear transmission, the repeated mention of Kate, the unusual activity, the decision to move early. There was a pause on the line, then a voice replied, measured and serious. "Understood. Continue to secure the area. Approval pending." The officer did not argue. He had expected this response. At least now communication was open. He turned back to the team. "We hold position. Stay visible. Keep it calm." The guards complied. Their presence alone changed the energy of the area. Whatever tension had existed began to fade. People moved on. The environment stabilized. Minutes later, confirmation finally arrived. Official approval was granted. Additional support was authorized if needed. The officer closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Relief washed over him, not because approval had come, but because their early action had worked. Kate was safe. The area was secure. No escalation had occurred. As higher officials arrived, questions were asked. The officer answered honestly and clearly. He explained the timeline, the signals, the reasons for acting early. There were serious faces, thoughtful pauses, and quiet acknowledgement. No one praised him openly. No one criticized him either. As the operation concluded and the guards prepared to leave, the officer looked once more at the location. Everything looked ordinary again. That was the goal. He returned to the vehicle, knowing that this moment would not make headlines. It would not be remembered by the public. But he also knew something else. Sometimes, the most important actions happened quietly, guided not by permission but by responsibility. And this time, moving before approval had made all the difference. The area slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the guards did not relax. Even after approval arrived, responsibility stayed heavy in the air. The senior officer knew that moments after action were just as important as the action itself. Mistakes were often found not during movement, but during reflection. Additional officials arrived quietly, without drawing attention. They spoke in low voices and observed the surroundings carefully. The senior officer greeted them with respect and calm confidence. He did not try to defend his actions. He simply explained what had happened step by step. He described the first radio message, the broken signal, the name that stood out, the silence that followed. He explained why waiting felt risky and how preparation had slowly turned into movement. He spoke clearly without emotion, focusing only on facts. The officials listened closely. Some asked questions. Others took notes. No one interrupted. They understood that this situation could have gone very differently. Meanwhile, the guards maintained their positions. Their posture remained alert but relaxed. They did not block roads or question people unnecessarily. Their goal was presence, not pressure. Kate was safe. That fact was confirmed quietly through secure communication. She was unaware of how close the situation had come to becoming serious, and that was exactly how it should be. The senior officer felt a quiet sense of relief, but he did not show it. His job was not to feel proud or afraid. His job was to ensure safety, then accept responsibility. As time passed, it became clear what had happened. The initial radio message had come from a unit operating on limited information. A misunderstanding, combined with delayed communication, had created confusion. The silence that followed was caused by a temporary signal issue, not by danger. But the unusual movement near the location had been real. Someone had been watching. Someone had noticed a gap in security and considered taking advantage of it. The early presence of the guards had changed that calculation. Because of their arrival, nothing else happened. The officials discussed this quietly among themselves. They understood that while the threat was not fully formed, the risk had been real. Early action had prevented a possible problem from becoming something worse. Eventually, the question slowed. One of the senior officials looked at the officer and spoke carefully. "You acted before approval," he said. "Yes," the officer replied simply. There was a pause. "And your action prevented escalation," the official continued. "Yes," the officer said again. No further explanation was needed. The guards began to withdraw slowly, one unit at a time. They did not rush. They left the area as calmly as they had arrived. The goal was to return everything to normal without leaving a trace of tension. As the vehicles moved away, the senior officer watched the location through the window. People walked by unaware. Shops opened and closed. Life continued. That was success. Back at the command center, the officer returned to his desk. The room felt familiar again. Screens glowed. Radios hummed softly. Routine resumed. But the officer knew that something had changed, even if it was invisible. A formal report had to be written. He began it carefully, choosing words with precision. He included every detail, every decision, every reason. He did not hide the fact that he had moved early. He did not exaggerate the threat. Honesty mattered more than justification. As he wrote, memories surfaced again. Past moments, past regrets. This time felt different. This time his instinct and experience had aligned. When the report was finished, he sent it through the proper channels. Then he waited. Waiting after action was always harder than waiting before it. Hours passed. No response came immediately. That was normal. Decisions at higher levels took time. The officer stood and walked slowly through the command center. He checked on his team, offering quiet words of thanks. No speeches, no praise, just acknowledgement. They nodded back, understanding that this was how things worked. They did not need recognition. They needed trust. Late in the evening, a message arrived from higher command. It was brief and formal. The action had been reviewed. The outcome had been positive. Procedures would be examined to improve communication and prevent similar confusion in the future. No punishment. No public mention. The officer read the message twice, then closed it. He felt a quiet release of tension. Not joy, not relief, just acceptance. This was the best possible outcome. He looked around the command center one last time before ending his shift. Everything was calm again. Just another day on the surface. As he prepared to leave, he thought about the thin line he had walked between obedience and responsibility. between waiting and acting. He knew that if the same situation happened again, he would likely make the same choice. Not because he enjoyed risk, but because he understood duty. Outside, night had fallen. The city lights glowed softly. Somewhere out there, Kate continued her life, unaware of how close a quiet decision had come to changing her day. And that was exactly how the senior officer wanted it. He walked away from the building without looking back, carrying the knowledge that some of the most important moments in service were the ones no one ever saw. Moments where action happened before permission. Moments where silence mattered. Moments where doing the right thing meant trusting experience over comfort. And those moments, though invisible, were the foundation of true protection. The days that followed passed quietly, but the senior officer did not forget what had happened. Outwardly, everything returned to routine. Shifts continued. Reports were filed. Radios carried the same calm voices as before. To anyone watching, it was just another week in royal security, but inside the officer's mind, the event stayed alive. He arrived early for his next shift, as he always did. He walked through the familiar corridors, greeting guards with small nods. The command center welcomed him with its steady glow and low hum. Everything looked exactly the same, yet he felt slightly different. He sat at his desk and reviewed updates from higher command. New communication guidelines were being discussed. Backup channels were being tested. Small improvements, quiet changes, nothing dramatic, but these changes existed because of what had happened. That mattered. The officer understood that real change rarely arrived with applause. It arrived slowly, through lessons learned and mistakes avoided next time. Throughout the day, guards stopped by his desk one by one. They did not speak openly about the incident. They did not need to. A shared look, a brief nod was enough. They trusted him. That trust meant more than praise. During a quiet moment, the deputy officer joined him. They stood near the radio panel, listening to routine updates. "You made the right call," the deputy said quietly. The senior officer did not answer right away. He kept his eyes on the screen in front of him. "We were lucky," he said finally. The deputy shook his head slightly. "Luck favors readiness." The officer allowed himself a small, tired smile. That was true. Later that afternoon, a training group passed through the command center. New guards, fresh faces, learning procedures and rules. They listened closely to instructions, memorizing protocols, believing that following them perfectly would prepare them for anything. The officer watched them quietly. Rules were important. Discipline mattered. But experience taught something deeper, that sometimes responsibility arrived before permission. He hoped they would learn that lesson without paying a high price. As evening approached, the officer stepped outside for a short break. The air was cool. The city moved calmly around him. Cars passed. People talked. Life continued as it always did. Somewhere not far away, Kate lived her normal life. She would never know about the broken radio signal, the quiet convoy, the early movement, the decision made in silence. She would never know how close uncertainty had come, and that was the point. Protection was not about recognition. It was about prevention. About ensuring that ordinary days stayed ordinary. The officer finished his break and returned inside. His shift continued smoothly. No urgent calls. No raised voices, just routine. Near the end of the shift, he reviewed the final logs. Everything was in order. He signed off and prepared to leave. As he gathered his things, he paused for a moment and looked around the room. He had spent much of his life here. He had given years to quiet service, unseen by most. He did not regret it. On his way out, he passed the radio console once more. The same radio that had spoken a single name and changed everything. It sat silently now, waiting. He understood that one day it would speak again. Another name, another unclear message, another moment where judgment would matter. When that day came, someone would have to decide again. Outside, night had fully settled. Lights reflected off the pavement. The city felt peaceful. The officer walked to his car and paused before getting in. He took one last look at the building behind him. No banners. No headlines, just stone, steel, and silence. He knew that history would never record this moment. No book would mention it. No speech would honor it. But that did not make it small. True service often lived in moments like these, moments when action happened quietly, when responsibility came before comfort, when the right choice was made without applause. As he drove away, the officer felt a deep, steady calm. He had listened when something felt wrong. He had acted when time mattered. He had protected without being seen. And that, to him, was the true meaning of duty.